I guess this isn't much of a surprise. Maybe at the lack of time it took the jury to decide, but longtime Democratic insider Tim Mapes was found guilty this afternoon on perjury and obstruction of justice charges, alleging that he lied to a federal grand jury in an attempt to protect his longtime boss, former House Speaker Michael Madigan. So wrote my next guest, who joins us on a very busy afternoon, Jason Meisner from your Chicago Tribune. Jason, thanks so much. Are you surprised at the verdicts being returned so quickly today?
Not really. We did get a note from the jury early on where they requested hard copies of the indictment and his entire grand jury transcript, which was pretty lengthy. So weren't sure how long they were going to settle in and look at that. But it was only about 5 hours. This was not a hugely complicated case, but there were a lot of recordings, wiretapped recordings, where if they started digging into those and wanted to play them all, we could have been here for days. But in the end, I mean, it was a fairly straightforward did he lie or didn't he case, and they said he did.
You know, I thought the defense had a good argument. You asked this guy several hundred questions, and he apparently lies to you on 7 questions. Is that enough to really throw a 25-year potential sentence on him? I mean, that when the feds come calling, you better make sure you remember correctly.
Yeah, and as everybody says, you know, when they come calling, they already know the answers usually. So, it's good to keep in mind that when you're asking you questions, and he knew at that point. This is 2021. His friend Michael McLean had already been indicted. He had been subpoenaed for all sorts of records, and he knew that there were wiretaps. And he knew that he had been on the phone with McLean. So he really, a lot of people say they can't believe he got himself into the situation. He had been immunized, meaning he would not be charged as long as he told the truth. And according to the jury and prosecutors, he repeatedly did not, mostly by saying he couldn't recall things when he was caught on wiretap talking about them.
Assistant U.S. Attorney Julia Schwartz, as you wrote, said if the defendant had been honest, he would have been a star witness. Why didn't he flip? What does Madigan have on him, I wonder?
Yeah, well, I mean, Madigan commanded loyalty, and we saw the same thing with his longtime confidant, Michael McLean, who they did try to flip. We know that. He would not. He refused. He's now been convicted once, and he's facing trial with Madigan. This is McLean I'm talking about, in April. Mapes was cut of that same cloth, I guess you could say. He was offered immunity, and he was not implicated in the ComEd conspiracy, which was a focus of the grand jury and prosecutors. So maybe he thought he had an extra chip. Because he wasn't implicated in that. He wasn't really a part of that. Then he thought he could just skate by saying, I don't recall. But that turned out not to be the case. Obviously, prosecutors were irked that he was not being truthful and reminded him, the prosecutor in the grand jury reminded him several times. He said, do you realize that if you say you don't recall and the grand jury later thinks that they have evidence that you do recall, you could be charged with perjury? And he said, I do know that, and I don't recall.
Elaborate for us, if you would, Jason Meisner of the Tribune. I understand the perjury. That's pretty straightforward. How did he obstruct justice? Because that's the heavy one at 20 years.
Yeah, well, it's attempted obstruction of justice, and what that charge is alleging is that he continued to lie. It wasn't just the 7 times that were outlined in the perjury count. The obstruction count was all the other lies. I think there were 14 of them, where he said he didn't recall having any conversations about Lou Lang being forced to resign, and they had wiretaps on that. He didn't recall anything about Bob Rita and Michael McLean talking about gambling legislation. There were wiretaps and emails about that too. So the obstruction was he was trying to throw off the grand jury's investigation into Madigan's whole orbit. It didn't work because Madigan got indicted anyways. So that's why it's attempted. They still indicted him. He didn't actually block them, but they said he was trying to.
That's great clarification. You just wonder if all 3 of these guys, they're up in age now. Maybe their nests are well feathered, if not for themselves, for their families, their kids' or what have you. And, okay, do the best you can to us. We'll see how it all works out. We're going to appeal everything anyway, and, time may run on us naturally. We may shuffle off the mortal coil before we ever have to go to Oxford.
Yeah, well, Madigan is 82, I believe, and facing trial in April. He'll turn 83 while he's on trial. And by the time, if he's convicted and sentenced, he's going to be, into his 80s. Yeah, Mapes is 68. He probably will appeal, although his attorney did not comment on that on the way out. But yeah, a lot of these guys certainly are up in age and have to do that calculus when they decide, how they're going to proceed on this.
When the prosecutors are talking about the triangle power between Madigan and McLean and Mapes, did State Rep Bob Rita, did he actually use his hands to draw the triangle?
He did, yeah. He put his hands in a triangle, and later that was brought up again in closing arguments, and they actually had a little diagram where Madigan's image is at the top, his driver's license photo, I believe, and then Mapes and McLean were like the lower down on the triangle, and then you had all the other kind of Madigan insiders that formed more of the base, like Will Cousineau, and all the Lou Lang, Bob Rita, all those insiders or former associates that lined up to testify for the prosecution.
And Sandoval would have been in the soup through all this had he not died of COVID.
Sandoval was mentioned in this trial as the guy who was putting the brick on this Chinatown land deal in the Senate, and they were talking about that on the wiretap and how that wasn't a good idea for him. And of course, we know that Sandoval got indicted himself and pled guilty to bribery charges involving that red light camera case. And then, yes, he did unfortunately pass away. He was cooperating. He had really just started his cooperation when he got sick, so we'll never know where they were going on that one.
And the Chinatown land deal scam, allegedly, is part of April, isn't it?
Yeah, that's a big chunk of Madigan's racketeering indictment, and we got, for the first time, we saw testimony in open court about it from Nancy Kimmy, who was the lobbyist who was trying to arrange this deal. She came in and testified. She's a Republican, former Judy Bart Topeka aide. And so we got that laid out, and that will, in much more detail, be part of Madigan's case. That is the part of the case where Danny Solis comes in, because he made the audio and video recordings of Madigan himself, allegedly, in his office, talking about trying to get law business for his tax appeal business for his law firm from the developers on that project.
And he's kind of like patient zero through all these things as a Solis. But back to Lou Lang being told, you're not going to be elevated to leadership. In fact, you've got to go. It sounds like something out of a movie. Mapes was asking McLean on a wiretap if, when he went to see Lang, if he was going to wear his big boy pants. And then Mapes lied about knowing about that, and the feds came back and played that wiretap after they also had McLean talking to Lou Lang, you got to go.
Yeah, the whole Lou Lang episode is really kind of unseemly. Lou Lang was in the House for over 30 years. He had dreams of replacing Madigan one day as Speaker and got summarily pushed out because they were afraid of, that he was going to be a liability with the sex harassment stuff that was percolating in the background. But there was a moment in that wiretap where, yes, Mapes says, after McLean says, I'm going to have to tell him, he says, you're going to put your big boy pants on that day. And then Mapes makes a little like Godfather-esque reference where he says, Lang isn't going to get an offer he can't refuse on this one.
I haven't heard that one yet. When are they going to release the entire gift box set of these tapes?
Yeah, that tape is a greatest hit for sure. It's out there. It's on our website.
Oh, good grief! The evidence. All right, I look for these each and every day, and sometimes I get into the rabbit hole, and I've said, I've read that article. It can't be there, and I go to the next one. I'll have to find that one for sure because I have the big boy pants. I also have the daddy talk, but that's from the previous trial, obviously. But I mean, they're great. I mean, they're just great. So he says, "Are you gonna put on your big boy pants to go talk to him?" And then lo and behold, McLean is talking to Lou Lang gets recorded, and then the feds come back and ask Mapes, did you know that McLean went to talk to Lou Lang and tell him to get out of the way, he's going to quit? No, I didn't know anything about that. Boom, you're done.
Right. And the defense argument was that, it was a busy year. It was a busy year. The defense did a great job with what they had, but what they had was really bad evidence against them. And to say that he wouldn't remember anything about that episode, which was a big deal to push Lou Lang out like that, just obviously didn't fly with the jury. But these tapes really, we'll see more of them in April, but they really do give a behind-the-scenes look at the beginning of the end for Madigan and his operation. It was all starting to kind of crumble, and we know it ended up crumbling.
It's becoming much clearer now, thanks to you and Ray Long and others. What twisted webs we weave, but it takes you a while to put this all together. But there are many Venn diagrams of alleged corruption here. Thank you very much. I've taken too much of your time. I know you have a bad deadline right ahead of you, so I appreciate it. Thanks so much, Jason.
Thanks for having me on.
Jason Meisner from the Tribune joining us here.
And then I got to tell him that he's got to move on. He has no future in the house.
Will you be wearing your big boy pants that day?
Big boy pants?
Will you be wearing your big boy pants that day?
I'm sure that Mr. Mapes will be wearing big boy pants, maybe some Depends coming up in January when he's sentenced.